Caribbean. This event was organized under the 26th Annual Conference of the International Consortium on Applied Bioeconomy Research, as Hugo mentioned before. I'm Harold Gamboa. I'm a specialist of the Bioeconomy and Productive Development Division at ICA, and I will be moderating this event. During this panel, we're going to have the chance of hearing in more detail some aspects about the situation that is currently being observed as a result of the war that is already having impacts on Latin America and the Caribbean, but we will also have the chance to analyze and discuss the potential opportunities for the region as a result of bioeconomy to support the resilience of agri-food systems. So without further ado, we're going to start the event, and we're going to listen to the first presentation that is called Impacts of the War in the Agricultural and Energy Markets of Latin America and the Caribbean and the Role of the Bioeconomy. For that, it's an honor for me to introduce Mr. Eduardo Trigo. He has a PhD in agricultural economy from Wisconsin University. He knows a lot about policies for science and technology systems in developing countries and topics related to management. Currently, he is trying to apply this experience to promote actions for the benefit of the development of bioeconomy in Latin America and the Caribbean. And since 1998, he has been the director of the SEO group that develop consulting activities for research, organization, technological policy management for the development of the new bioeconomy. Dr. Trigo was also the Director of Research and Technology Transfer at ICA for 8 years, and currently he's an advisor to the Bioeconomy and Productive Development Program at ICA. Dr. Eduardo Trigo, the floor is yours. Thank you, Harold. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to all the organizers and the program for the opportunity of being here and to talk about this particular moment that we are living and how the situation, the global situation, is having an impact on our region, and particularly try to put bioeconomy in that context. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation to help me. Can you tell me if you can see it all right? Yes, perfect, thank you. So basically, I'm going to organize my presentation in two main parts. One is the impact that the war is having on Latin America and the Caribbean, the war in Ukraine, and then the potential role of bioeconomy in the new scenarios that are emerging from that situation of war. Now, moving to the first topic, there's an issue that we have to emphasize clearly. This is not just about the impact of the war, but rather we have to consider that the situation that is emerging from the war is having an impact on the region, on top of a situation that was already very serious, that was the COVID pandemic. In 2020, the region suffered a GDP contraction of 7%, the highest in 120 years, and 3 times as high as what happened in the other emerging and developing countries. As a result, poverty grew to over 30% of the population. That means 260 million people, and 86 million of those are in extreme poverty. According to LAC, around 60 million people suffered hunger in 2019, and we had an increase of 9% in the number of people that suffered food insecurity. That is, war appears in this context. And it has quite a profound impact on the region, as we're going to see. And here I want to emphasize that we have to think that although This crisis, when you see the evolution of prices, etc., it doesn't look as different compared to other situations that we have seen in the past. This time, we have a combination of disruptions in the food markets, fertilizers, and energy as a result of the weight of Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine on these topics. In the case of food, that means 24% of wheat exports, 13% of corn, 23% of barley, 57% of sunflower oil. It's estimated that around 12 to 15% of the total calories that are traded internationally come from that region. So that means um, a very important disruption in the area. And on the other hand, Russia is an important exporter of fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, between 15 and 20% in the past few years. As a result, we've seen difficulties of access and price increases. And of course, we also have, this is what has happened with prices. And we see that the in the final part of the graph, you can see what happens with international prices of commodities. Well, we can see a very significant increase, quite above previous peaks in previous situations. Well, I don't need to give you the details as to what happens in each market, but they are all significant increases, and particularly the futures prices are expected to have even more increases. So this has had an impact on the region. Differentiated effects depending on whether the countries are net exporters or not. Of course, this benefits net exporters, mainly cereals like Brazil, Argentina. In the past few years, Argentina has had a record of exports, not necessarily for the amount that was exported, but for the price increase. And on the other hand, many countries in the region are net importers, and some of them have very high rates of vulnerability, like Haiti, Grenada, St. Lucia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua. And these are quite complicated because they have to face a situation where the increases of the costs of their imports are very significant. And here, and according to what is happening at the in the fertilizer markets, what we have is a significant fall in the affordability of fertilizers. So we might expect that this is going to have potential effects on productivity. They fall in almost all products. In rice, it's most significant. It's more marked. And we can expect that given the nature of the productive relationships and the production chain, this situation will cover not only commodities, but all the products in the economy. This is a process that is underway. What we see now is a situation that is very dynamic, and the longer term consequences will depend eventually on the final resolution or on how this situation is solved. Speaking of the war, and energy price increases have many consequences that go beyond the objectives of this brief presentation. But let me tell you that one of the most important things of what is happening and all the costs and how they affect the operation of all the chain, because this affects the costs of inputs, of products, of services. Just for you to have a an idea of what is happening, here we can see the costs of the freight of the per kind of vessel. We can see at the end of the graph, we can see significant increases in prices compared to what was happening in the past 15 years. 70% of the increase in a 70% increase in maritime transport costs, and that has a lot of effects on chains that are now globally organized, and as a result, we not only see changes in prices, but many other structural changes as to looking for alternatives, not only alternative suppliers, but also alternative products, etc. And this is what we are going to see and what we are already seeing in the next few years. In general, the result of this situation is that the region is having, in line with the global situation, there's a generalized increase in inflation in all the countries in the region. And associated to that, perhaps the most relevant consequence, given how this affects the whole operation of the economy, is that poverty, measured in number of people living with less than $5 per day, it's $5.5 per day. This is a figure used by the World Bank, has increased from 155 million in 2019 to almost 175 million. That is 20 million more people fell into poverty, and it's expected to remain like that throughout 2022. So this is forcing countries to face a series of short-term policies to face these social situations that are potentially very disruptive. Now, to start and now to conclude my presentation, what is the role of bioeconomy? And here we have to think that one of the outstanding characteristics of the region is the size and diversity of its biological resources. Bioeconomy is about using biological resources. So initially, we may think of this as a strategic response to the main problems that are derived from the current situation. Of course, perhaps not in the short term, but as a response in terms of our vision of development. And here I would like to highlight two aspects that will be discussed in more detail in the panel, but it's worth highlighting them here. And one is that through the use of advances in biotechnology, the region might make a better use of the huge biological diversity that it has, particularly in tropical countries, for the strengthening of their food security. The tropical region in Latin America has the characteristics that, well, it's one of the regions with the highest biological wealth, and at the same time, it presents high rates of food vulnerability. It's difficult to understand in this time and age that with so much richness, they are having difficulties with food security. That is the most essential for human life, food. New technologies allow us to move those resources, and that process is one of the essences of biotechnology. And that is one of the areas that we should think about how to make the best use of that.
Y la biomasa hoy está también asociada.
And biomass today is related to the sustainable production fossil fuels in the different bioenergy forms. A second opportunity that we will discuss, or that is going to be discussed in the panel, but I believe on these two elements, bioeconomy of the region has a huge contribution to make beyond the short-term consequences that we may see. As important element that will favor these processes, I'm not going to give details uh, in this slide and the next one, but I would like to show it as an example. The countries included here, 11 countries, have uh, advanced strategies to bioeconomy. When we talk about taking advantage of bioeconomics as a response to the challenge of the war, we're not talking about a new process. It is a process that is in their way, and that takes us in each country with the strategies to see how they are managing the big topics, bioenergy, biosecurity, so the general frameworks of policies. And we see that in all these countries, we have not only general strategies, but the frameworks for a good use of these new development pathways. And this is absolutely important because it gives bioeconomy sort of an opportunity. It is not about talking about potentialities. Is to talk about something that is already occurring in the region, and therefore have a realistic dimension of their possibilities for implementation. And to conclude my comment, my introductory comment to this panel, a general comment to say so, this war is creating a scenario where there is a kind of weird convergency of factors that occur from time to time at the global level. We are having a situation where there is an important realignment to geopolitics with an important disruption of the current value chains. And in this context, to look for new options has a lower cost for those who enter into the business. From now on, we will face a world that, from the geopolitical point of view, is being reorganized. In this reorganization, there are stakeholders that grow opportunities that appear, and stakeholders that weaken, and opportunities that become more complex to move on. And we should weigh that in this context. The new world of bioeconomy may seem less risky in its transformation in line of a world that is being forming, and somehow the global value chains are being reorganized. This is strengthened by the fact that there are economic matters. There are changes in the prices, in the relative prices, changes in the relative prices associated to the market operation, but taken to the need to find options because there is no offer, as it is happening in some cases with the fertilizers. Again, there are changes in the relative prices. If we analyze them deeply, we will see that they are in favor of the possible options offered by bioeconomics. Alternatives, technological alternatives, in terms of relation or ratio input output alternatives regarding fossil resources. And this also happens, and I believe this is going to be a point for the panel, when the technological basis of bioeconomics is facing a mature time. And this is not something new. 70, 80 years have gone by since the new cycle of biotechnology began with the discovery with the double X and the expansion of biotechnology as horizontal platform. And that includes all the sectors and is deep enough with mature technologies where the markets are markets that where there are some applications that are at the level of technology commodities. This convergence, I believe, and I would like to state as a hypothesis to discuss here, it's not going to be difficult that this is translated into an acceleration of the transition towards bioeconomy. So that will have mainly positive implications with a broad availability of biologic resources in general and biomass in particular. I believe that the challenge now is to think on the institutional and political scenario aimed to transform what I consider this convergence of geopolitical, economic, and technological factors implied. I mean, this opportunity represented here will have a positive answer. Talking to one of the members of the panel yesterday, we said that maybe the region has been quite influenced by the measure of ICLAC in the 50s, which is the substitution of industrial development as a model, as a business model. Maybe bioeconomy is stated for the future as a model similar to this one, but now with roots in natural competitiveness of the region and with deeper roots, and that would be really good if we can make the decisions to where to go with the institutional frameworks. Well, this is my contribution. I really appreciate your attention, and I'll give you back the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Eduardo Trigo, for this beautiful representation and the right excellent use of time. You have shared with us rich and important and updated information. Continuing with the schedule now, let's listen to the next presentation entitled The Vision of the North-South Countries of Latin American Caribbean Exporters of Cereals, Oilseeds, and Biofuels. We have Mr. Agustin Tejada Rodriguez. Mr. Tejada Rodriguez is currently the chief economist of the Argentine Buenos Aires Cereal Exchange, expert in agricultural economy, agricultural and commercial policies, and international decisions. He has published articles and works in newspapers and specialized magazines. He has a PhD from different national universities. He is also a member of the steering committees of Argentina. He is coordinator of the Agricultural Committee of Agriculture in Argentina and member of the network of producer countries from the South. He was chief economist of the Foundation Manad and advisory of the Agricultural Commission of the Chamber of Deputies of the Republic of Argentina. Tejada Rodriguez has a license degree from the University in economy from the University of Buenos Aires and postgraduate student from the La Plata University and studies from the University of San Andres. Mr. Tejada, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Now you have the floor to begin with your presentation. Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you for the invitation to the organizers. It is a great pleasure to share this space with you, particularly with friends in the panel. We'll talk about the vision of the North-South countries, so the cereals, oilseeds, and biofuel exporting countries in line to the reality stated by the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. In line with the introduction presentation given by Eduardo, I would like to highlight that the war has generated disruptive impacts with consequences in different levels in trade. And an important part of my presentation will be has to do with this. There's also a redirectioning of the commercial flows because of the impact of the war, but also we have very important impacts about the international agenda topics. National security, food security is on the top of the international agenda, relegating, at least for now, the sustainability agenda, but accelerating movements towards energy transition. And not only changes in the topics, also changes in the stakeholders, as Eduardo mentioned at the end. We have modification in the chess board, in the global geopolitics, with consequences in the food geopolicy, and finally on the rules and trade relations. And that presents new challenges for our countries to to embed it in international trade. So there's going to be opportunities we're going to talk about. Maybe the more direct impact, the fastest impacts, the most important ones have occurred in the international prices. Eduardo said that the prices has a scale up toward historical serious levels. So the futures price in the market, in Chicago market, we have high prices, but we have also a high volatility. Last month, we have had an important situation with the international price without explanation, and linked to the uncertainty, the current situation and speculation on the main future markets occurs. We have high prices, as you can see here. Just 4% of the days since 90 to the present, we have had higher prices compared to what we are having now. But not only about the grain prices, we also talk about inputs and energy prices that determines a significant increase of costs from one campaign to another one. A producer in Argentina requires 50% more of investment in US dollars compared to the previous campaign in order to obtain the same quantity of product. There is also high volatility in the input and energy prices, and the prices of fertilizer have been declining. Although in this graph, you can see that they remain at very high historical levels. Challenge on the side of imports. Our countries are countries where this presentation is based. They are net food exporter, but an important part of them import products. So that affects seriously the trade balance. Before talking about the opportunities for bioeconomy, let me highlight the role of the bioeconomy, but also international trade as solution to the big challenges, to the disruptions we are seeing. Not only the ones generated by the war, but also by other factors that are affecting trade and agricultural products, and thinking on the response for compliance of the SDGs. International trade has significantly increased for the past years. It has two main roles. The first one is food security. It lets you get nutritional elements at lower prices in the whole region, but also in terms in sustainability, it promotes the more efficient use of natural resources and reduction of greenhouse effect gases. So
y con sistemas productivos más amigables con el medio ambiente.
The countries are not the ones with more environmentally friendly productive systems, as we see in this region, and mainly in the southern cone countries. Those will be the ones that will respond to the growth of the international demand. Growth of trade has these countries using the opportunities. United States, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, Argentina are among the 20 top exporters. Almost 30% of global exports. They are very pertinent stakeholders in exporting meat, maize, wheat, soya, We need to highlight Argentina, Brazil, and Mercosur. They are among the main net exporters. So the southern corn region is the main net exporting region of agri-industrial products nowadays. In this line, the opportunities that present to these countries. The first one is related to exports. So increase of international prices, but also possibility to place more quantity of product because of the absence or the possible absence of Russia, and particularly of Ukraine in the international market, particularly in grains and byproducts. These countries have a very important participation. That is why we have seen that the countries, particularly Argentina, Brazil, and other net exporting countries, have seen an increase at the record levels of their exports. Not only increase in exports and prices and quantities, but also the possibility to have a better access of our products into the main consumption markets. This is what we may call as unmasking of protection. We saw on the side of importers, we saw a reduction of requirements that were quite demanding before. This is a lateral market we need to consider. On the side of biofuels, the opportunities are clear for participation in the energy grid, in the national energy grid, but also internationally. Maybe the biggest opportunities are not in the short term, but thinking in the medium and long term. The possibility to consolidate this region as a reliable and sustainable supplier of food, energy, and other goods and services. It is difficult that the world relies again in the Black Sea for production of food. This is the opportunity of the region to consolidate as a future. Opportunities on the side of technologies, high-cost scenarios that may favor or speed up the curve or technologies adoption that are available for users and to promote the technological responses in order to improve the efficiency in the use of inputs and resources and the environmental performance of our productive systems. This is occurring now. The work could speed up this because of the change in the relative prices as a consequence. In Argentina, particularly, we have an increase in the use of technologies such as variable inputs application and other technologies linked to the precision agriculture, but also the increase of the participation of biologic origin products that may replace fossil origin products. We have seen an important growth with the agriculture applied of these products. Biofertilizers reach 10% in the case of wheat production. But maybe the biggest opportunity, besides the trade ones, besides the technological ones, is the opportunity the current time is generating for the region to consolidate a version of its own and to put it on the negotiation tables in relation to the role of the agriculture and trade in line with the ICABR efforts. A vision that highlights the role of technology to produce more with less with biotechnology as a flag platform that highlights the role of international trade in response to the big global challenges with trade rules based on the scientific knowledge, and particularly emphasizing that there's no unique approach of sustainability, but there are as many approaches as realities we may have. And the sustainable intensification model of this side of the world gives big responses to these challenges. The region has the attributes to make good use of the opportunities mentioned. It is included among the main net exporters. It has a business model, particularly in the south, which is quite innovative, with less intensive agriculture and the use of inputs, with technological gaps to close to capture increases in productivity, and particularly an important product in the current context. We are on a peace continent. Because of these attributes, and the biggest part of the exercises mark this region like the one with the biggest potential to increase raise exports and to good use of opportunities provided by international trade to bioeconomy. These are the last perspectives from FAO, where you can see that this is the only region with an increase and contribution to the net exporters to 2030, with Brazil particularly, and then Argentina being the countries that fraction these exports.
Para que la región alcance el potencial, para que la región aproveche.
So it's important for the region to reach its own potential and to use these areas. For that, we need at least two elements. First, an international insertion policy, given the current context that is unique. There are very important changes, particularly in geopolitics. And this region is politically aligned in the Western Hemisphere, but its biggest commercial or trade partners are on the other side of the world. And that is a big challenge for insertion. And then basically being able to reach an agreement regionally and develop policies for productive development and for international negotiations so that the incentives are aligned, so that all the actors in the value chain can respond consequently to the opportunities. Perhaps I've used too much of my time, so this is the end of my presentation. And then, of course, I will be available for any questions you may have. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tejada, for your clear and wonderful presentation. Now, dear participants, we move into the third participation of the day, and that's Jorge Enrique Bedoya Vizcaya. He's going to talk about the vision of the tropical countries, exporters of tropical crops and importers of cereals, oilseeds, and fuels. Mr. Bedoya is currently the president of the Society of Farmers of Colombia. He's an economist from the Javerian University of Bogota, a master's degree in economy from the university, and a master's degree in public policies from the School of Government John F. Kennedy at Harvard University, where he was also an assistant professor and student liaison at the Student Leadership Center of that university. He has a wide experience. He has been part of the National Federation of Coffee Producers, and he presided the National Federation FENAVI in Colombia between 2011 and 2015. He was the Vice Minister of Defense for International Policies and Affairs. He was also the Director of Corporate Affairs for Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador in Bavaria, and he was the director of the Bavarian Foundation between 2015 and 2017. Since March 2017, he's been the president of the Association of Farmers of Colombia. That is the largest farmers association in this country that combines 22 production sectors, representing over 73% of GDP in the agricultural sector in Colombia. Mr. Bedoya, it's an honor to have you here today. So now we pass the floor to you so you can start with your presentation. Thank you, Harold. Special greetings to all the other panelists for their very interesting presentations and all the participants as well. After listening to what Eduardo and Agustin have just shared, I would like to give you a vision of what has happened in my country. Colombia is a country that produces 73 million tons of food per year, but we also import 13.8 million tons. Of those 13.8 million tons that we import, more than half is corn for the production of food for our animal inventory, soybean that is also part of this production complex for the production of food for animal concentrate, 1.1 million tons of wheat, mostly from Canada, of course, for the production of food in Colombia. And our main suppliers, at least in the case of corn and soybean, are the United States and our friends from Mercosur. And why do I mention this here? Because what has happened, not only since that unfortunate February 24th, when Putin decided to invade Ukraine, that disrupted international markets, these commodities, although we don't import neither from Ukraine or from Russia and these products, but anyway, that generates a big pressure on the costs of production of food that are very relevant in Colombia, like chicken, egg, pig, milk, and tilapia. To that, we should add that in Colombia, as in many other countries in Latin America, we import more than 2 million tons of fertilizers, of which obviously, well, most of them come from Trinidad and Tobago, the US, Canada, but undoubtedly, at some point, Russia and Belarus were important producers and suppliers. So that also generated, as Agustin mentioned in his presentation, a disruption not only in the supply expectations, but also on the costs for fertilizing our soils for producing those 73 million tons of food. So that has been the effect on Colombia, added to what we suffered last year with the crisis in the supply chains. And that is that the production costs in many sectors skyrocketed. We've seen with deep concern that we have an annual food inflation above 23%. We had months where annual inflation for products like potato reached 140%. And the same with many basic products for Colombia's. In our population, 46% are informal workers, and many of them are below the poverty line. So this is a perfect storm, unfortunately, to have inflation and also in order to have uncertainty as to the supply and the cost of supply of inputs for the production of food, particularly fertilizers. And all that is even more complex with what has happened with the climate changes and its effects. In some countries that export inputs to Colombia, but also on the production in our own country. Unfortunately, Russia's invasion on Ukraine, apart from being unfortunate in the aspect of human rights for Ukrainians, it also generates, as Agustin mentioned, a lack of trust in the suppliers from the Black Sea. So we are always closely related with suppliers from the Americas because of the competitiveness. But in the case of cereals and oilseeds, we have to consider what is the true future as to our national production. Out of the 6 million tons of corn that are imported in Colombia, 5 million are yellow corn from the industry of concentrates, and also soybean goes to those sectors. And if that was not enough, in Colombia, we recently had presidential elections, and we are less than a month from the inauguration of the new president. And that's also a big challenge, considering the public policies that have been announced. Many announcements have been made, for instance, the full substitution of imports. Well, all of us in this panel, we know that markets do not necessarily work like that. And the new administration will have to face inflation that result from the situations mentioned before, but also the challenges of applying a government plan that has to be considered carefully in order not to generate an additional disruption in supply chains. Unfortunately, Russia's invasion on Ukraine, the invasion itself, has also had a favorable effect in some of our sectors, such as the production of palm oil in Colombia. As a result of what happened with sunflower oil in Ukraine, we've seen an incredible increase in the prices of these products, and it has been very beneficial for our farmers that are increasing their profitability and their share in exports. But of course, that also generates some pressure on whatever is related to fossil fuels. Colombia has made important progress in the production of biodiesel, ethanol, with the sugarcane industry, and that implies public policies that should encourage that energy transformation that goes hand in hand with what the incumbent president did in the area of bioeconomy and the WISE mission. So to summarize, our country is not foreign to the impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine and the complexity that implies for Colombian consumers. Well, there's still a lot to be seen in that respect, but we have 40 million agricultural hectares. We have water. We have investors, not only from Colombia, but international investors coming to Colombia to produce food. But it will all depend, as in all of our countries, on the security guarantees provided to investment and to the new policies of the new president, Mr. Preto, what he decides to generate in order to counteract the impacts that we are seeing. And now, to conclude, I would like to mention the issue of fertilizers. As I said before, imports and costs, but it apparently has been eased in some products. But as we have a big potential for the production of corn and oil seeds, but with important changes with the seeds and the practices and the business model, in the case of fertilizers, at least potassium chloride will be impossible. Apparently, Colombia can have positive prospects in the area of phosphorus rock mining, but crude and nitrogenated fertilizers, well, there's a big discussion in the country as to fracking, the offshore exploration for oil. There may be some positive sides there, but this goes hand in hand with environmental aspects that are also part of the national discussion. So in the medium term, we don't see a systematic reduction as to the dependence on imports from other countries. And the potential that we have for agriculture, I'm sure will take many years to develop. We will not reach the level of Argentina, Brazil, or the States, but our big concern now is what may happen with fertilizers in order to keep increasing that production of 73 million tons of foods that are, of course, mainly intended for domestic consumers. So that is the overview of what has happened in my country. Of course, if there's any question afterwards, I will be, of course, ready to answer. Thank you. Undoubtedly, Mr. Bedoya has described very clearly the situation in tropical countries. Thank you so much. And now we are moving to the final presentations on opportunities and challenges of the bioeconomy pathways in the Russia-Ukraine war scenario. In this session, we are today with another group of important international speakers. Each of them will be discussing important pathways of bioeconomy, and they will have around 7 minutes to present on each specific topic. So we're going to start this panel with Agustin Torroba. Mr. Torroba is economist. He has a master's degree from the University of Buenos Aires and diploma of energy and energy planning. He was a consultant on energy issues. He advised and was part of many international energy research groups. He was an advisor to the former Minister of Energy and Mining of Argentina, National Director of Biofuels. He has written specialized papers, books, and chapters of books on biofuels and energy, and a guest professor at the University of Buenos Aires in economics and at the Austral University at the graduate course on agribusiness. He has also conducted research at the 3 de Febrero University in Argentina. Currently, he's an international specialist in biofuels and renewable energies from the Inter-American Institute of Cooperation for Agriculture, ICA. Dear Agustin Torroba, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Harold. It's a pleasure to share this panel with so many distinguished guests. We are friends with some of them. So as we don't have much time to present, I will be very brief. And I'm going to share a couple of slides. Basically, I will talk about biofuels, and I will divide this analysis between the short and the long term. As a spoiler, these are the 3 main points, and they will also be the conclusions of my presentation. And we're going to start from this assumption, and that is sort of the final assumption also that Eduardo Trigo mentioned in his presentation, and that is that the war between Russia and Ukraine produced a rare convergence of factors that should be translated into an acceleration of the transition to bioeconomy. So particularly, the central assumption of this presentation is that the war between Russia and Ukraine has accelerated the development of biofuels, which already had an important previous development. The second item is that the conventional production and consumption of biofuels will be accelerated in the short and medium term. And conventional biofuels, I mean biodiesel that is used to replace fossil fuels, and bioethanol that is used to replace gasolines, also from fossil origin. And the third point is that the production and consumption of other biofuels will be accelerated in the medium and long term. This is particularly biogas and a biofuel that is emerging now with its own dynamics and very fast, and that's the biofuels for aviation. So let us start with the short and medium term. Obviously, the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine also challenged the concept of energy security. The war between Russia and Ukraine in the energy markets has had an impact that is contrary to the impact of COVID. COVID reduced by around 30% the consumption of oil in the core of the crisis, and oil even had negative prices. For instance, in WTI, that is the reference of the oil market in the United States. The escalation of the conflict and then the beginning of the war resulted in oil prices increasing considerably. They broke the barrier of the $100, and they still have an upward trend. And in the past week, the prices were around $120 that are, there have been higher prices in the past, but they are considerably high now. This is combined with geopolitical factors because there were sanctions on the purchase of Russian oil. Remember that Russia is the third largest producer and the third largest exporter of oil in the world, 12% of total oil. Of course, that had two impacts. First, there was a strong increase in the price of oil, as I'm showing here, and of all the derivatives, gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, etc. And additionally, it has caused supply problems. And this is a dual opportunity for biofuels. First, because in some cases they end up being cheaper than fossil fuels. And second, because they become like a guarantee for the supply of basic energy products like oil derivatives. The Americas here are net importers of oil, but as Agustin mentioned, in the Southern Cone and in other countries, they are net exporters of biomass that can be industrialized to produce biofuels. In some tropical countries like Colombia, the same happens, for instance, with palm oil. The graph on the left shows you very briefly the regional balance of gasoline and diesel, the main oil derivatives in the region. You can see that without any exception, all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are net exporters of diesel and gasoline. If we aggregate it and if we consolidate it with the oil sector, we have a deficit in all the Americas of around 8 million barrels per day. So they are net importers. And today they are producing around 2 million barrels per day of biofuels. And very easily, by industrializing some exports in some products, the Americas would be able to double this production, that is to reach more than 4 million barrels only of these substitutes of diesel and gasoline. And here, if you want, we can see both opportunities in prices. In this graph on the left, you can see how today the average price of ethanol in some of the international markers is quite lower than the price of gasoline. And this opens up the first opportunity as to prices. And there are also opportunities as to quantities. For instance, we have in the case of Argentina, given some problems with the supply of fossil diesel in the season of the fine grains, Argentina decided to double the mix of biodiesel, more than doubled. It moved it to 5%, from 5% mix to 12.5 mix. This is to ensure the supply of diesel. And you can see how with the prices, the US did something similar with ethanol. And for the first time in history, they authorized the use of 15% ethanol in the summer in the US. So we have policies in the north and in the south that are quite similar, some based on a price issue and others based on an issue of supply and amounts.
Así como en el petróleo, los problemas
As in oil, the price issue and supply problems are replicated for natural gas. Some markers like in Europe move from 6 to more than 60 US dollars per million of BTU. This is associated to the production of fertilizers, but there's also a restatement at the block level as well as world level of the energy transition. In that regard, the biogas has some technological maturity already, but does not have the same dissemination levels as liquid fuels. It appears as a significant alternative. In fact, Europe is presenting this program called European Union Repower and plans to change part of the exports by biogas. Associated to biogas production, there is also the production of biofertilizers, and this is an aspect to take into consideration. Also, the acceleration of the oil prices speed up some ongoing transitions. An ongoing transition, a significant one that we saw from previous years, but it becoming accelerated, is the new role of the biofuels, particularly for air transportation. They will play a significant role. So the only way for this is impossible that electromobility by hydrogen has considerable levels of penetration in long distance air transportation. So there is a consensus in the air industry, meaning that the aviation biofuels with some energy efficiency measures will become the main vectors of decarbonization of this sector. And I conclude my presentation with the highlights as I began a summary of this. There is an acceleration of the biofuels development as a consequence of the war between Russia and Ukraine. In the short term, because of supply and price matters, there will be an acceleration of the consumption of biodiesel and bioethanol. Those with the biggest development in the world. In the medium run and long term, there's no question they will have a prominent development. I'm referring to biogas and aviation biofuel. So I hope I have respected the time allowed, and I conclude my presentation with that. Thank you, Agustin, for this important presentation. It is also part of this panel, Mr. Roberto Vicente. He has a license degree in economy, magister in economy, professor of agricultural economy, and professor of the political bioeconomy in Cuba. And he has been coordinator of the National Agricultural Census and National Director of Statistics of the primary sector of INDEC. Is expert in the industrial organization technology and sectoral analysis, and consultant of different international companies such as LAC, IDB, WHO, and other companies. Mr. Besang, floor is yours. Good morning. Thank you very much. Just hold on. Can you see my presentation now? Yes, we can, sir. The question is how bioeconomy and biotechnology dialogue in this situation. First thing I want to say is that we have not only the war problem, we have several black swans or swans of different colors that have been occurring through time, particularly for the past 4 or 5 years. And that gave a particular characteristic. So according to this, we'll talk, I'm not going to talk in war terms, but I'm going to talk to the general situation. There's different disruptions we have experienced in 3 particular aspects. The first one is related to the pandemic. There is a short summary of the situation for the past 8-10 years that modified the spectrum substantially. Ebola appears in the 70s, and then in 2010, 2012, it explodes. SARS is another important impact. The African pork swan pest that changed the way biotechnology to see things. In another group, almost simultaneously with WhatsApp, we have genic edition technology, which is another step of transgenic, and that
Recording in progress.
in the case of COVID, we took some 45 to 60 days and to find to discover the DNA of the virus from the Manhattan Project that did not exist. It did not exist in mankind as such a magnitude, coordination, and in this case of such complexity. And this is talking about the existence of a new model of applied biotechnology according to the old one, but also on the implications of several techniques. Number 2, in 120 days, a vaccine relatively tested was generated. And in the course of 1 year, 12 vaccines went to the market with some effectiveness. And in the current time, there are some 250 platforms available. This is new and relevant data that sends us to the almost instantaneous response provided by society in the world to this new condition. And the last point I want to highlight in this of genic platforms generation, new ones apply to new challenges, among them those who come from this war conflict that seems arrive to stay for a while, is the fact that there is a double game between what we may call cooperation from the scientific point of view, strictly, and production, where more than cooperation, there is competition because of the magnitude of the interest at the stake. I end by saying this competition that will probably transfer to other assets, not only COVID, but other challenges, in the near future implies that the positioning of some large companies and or public and private companies and or governments send not only to the scientific capacity but also to the technological capacity and basically the control of supplementary assets that are around the production but also around the distribution of these products. And I will conclude with this. My apologies because I could not find the place to expand the presentation in line with the words of some speakers that participated before me. We have this feeling that the dialogue between the modern biotechnology with these genic emission platforms and all the services of genic lab is an amazing field of activity that is being opened, and it implies irreversibility in the change. The pendulum has moved in one direction, but is not going to go back to the original point, but to an intermediate and completely different point. Number two, the consolidation of biotechnology platforms. The countries of the region have something to say, and a growing interdependency worldwide, not only in scientific and technological terms, but also in terms of value chains that are being reconfigured now, more than just in time or just in case. Facing the disruptions occur in the past years, and all this is taking us to the relatively well-founded impression that the new conditions, technological conditions, and world geopolicy almost a turn to the diplomacy with natural resources and less with technology. However, they are promoting the bioeconomy according to the natural resources, the biotechnology capacity that exists in some of the countries of the region, as well as the windows of opportunity of international markets. Thank you very much, and my apologies for not finding the way to show full screen. Thank you, Mr. Roberto. No problem with that. So excellent presentations we are receiving today. And now we have Mr. Nicolas Cagduque. Nicolas is the current president of Bioprotection Global, the Global Federation of Regional and National Biocontrol Manufacturer Associations that brings together more than 800 biocontrol and bioprotection companies from all the world. He is a serial entrepreneur and board member who has co-founded and co-led several triple bottom line and bio-based companies scaling up disruptive protected technologies. His fields of expertise include nature-based solutions, bioprotection, biomimicry, and bioinnovation focused in the agri-food, biocontrol, agroforestry, and personal care industries. Nicolas is currently the chairman of Asobiocol and Bioentropic, a food and land use coalition, ambassador and trustee for the Nature Conservancy. Mr. Nicolas, floor is yours. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, perfectly. Okay, special greetings. Thank you for this invitation and my appreciation to the panelists for the such interesting presentations you have shared with us. Today, I'm going to talk about the industry of bio-based agricultural inputs as a fundamental industry to accelerate the transition towards resilient and climate and nature positive food systems. This is an industry, an emerging industry, although first tools used by mankind to combat pests were precisely bioinputs in the incipient phases of the development of agriculture. With the arrival of the Green Revolution towards the 40s and 50s, these technologies were moved to a second level and forgotten for several decades. However, some 30 years ago, and more intensively the last 20 years, there is an important effort to progress in understanding and the innovation and technological development. So this is an industry that is growing very fast, but it is still a marginal industry with regard to the market share. It has, with regard to chemical synthesis inputs, including those for crop protection. In Latin America, we consider that we may participate with some 3%, although the growth is around 20% annually compared to the growth of the agrochemicals that ranges from 1 to 3% annually. However, because of the COVID-19, and particularly now with the Russia and Ukraine situation, we have noticed an accelerated growth in the demand of bioinputs, signals that show that these technologies play a vital role to feed mankind without destroying nature. And this has been mentioned already, the growth of prices, not only fertilizers as mentioned, but also of inputs for crop protection, including fungicides, and to less extent the fungicides, but all this because of the world situation and the macroeconomic situation show that it is vital to make a change, to make a radical change in the way to produce food with shorter marketing circuits. To homologate the terms a little bit, in the scope of agricultural bioinputs, there are three big categories. Those for biocontrol, bioprotection. The term biopesticide is used by some people, but from the World Federation in our associations, we're trying to get away from this term biopesticides because of the negative connotation pesticides have in the imaginary of the common people. So we have the biofertilizers and biostimulants as main technologies to manage or to mitigate stress situation, abiotic stress situations.
Bioprotección hay cuatro grandes categorías.
So in terms of bioprotection, there are four large categories, and there we can see the huge potential of Latin America in order to be a leader, as it has been actually, in the development of these technologies for our countries, our region, and the whole world. Products based on microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, viruses, algae, natural substances like plant extracts, the biocontrol agents based on invertebrates like arthropods, nematodes, insect controllers, etc., and then semi-chemicals like pheromones, including another category that is not biocontrol but is essential, like pollinizers, including bees. And for that, there's advanced technologies developed by this emerging industry. I would like to frame this conversation as well around an essential concept that is based on the growing scientific evidence of the concept of the planet limits. This started at around 2011, led by the Resilience Center in Stockholm. For ordinary people, climate change is the most serious situation we are facing in environmental issues. However, the massive loss of biodiversity and the biogeochemical flows of phosphorus and nitrogen are the biggest causes for exceeding these limits. And in the case of phosphorus and nitrogen, that's precisely because of the irrational and uncontrolled use of chemical fertilizers that has led us to this complex situation. The concept of the overshoot day also says that 1969 was the last year when humanity did not have an overshoot over nature. This year, in July, we're already overshooting. So we need 1.7 planet Earths to support humanity's demand on nature, coming from this fragile balance. According to Bruce M. Campbell at a scientific publication, agriculture, we don't want to satanize agriculture, but it's the major driver of of how we are exceeding the planet boundaries. And with all the disruptions that have been mentioned already, agriculture is clearly in crisis. According to Bruce M. Campbell, agriculture is responsible for the loss of 60% of biodiversity, to a large extent because of the changes in the use of soil, the replacement of ecosystems that are essential to preserve this balance, and they are being replaced by single crops. Greenhouse gas emissions, well, 30% come from agriculture, 70% of the use of water, fresh water. So here I would like to mention a concept that was mentioned by Daniel Christian Wall, and he makes a big emphasis on the importance of accelerating a transition of productive systems based on carbon that are extractivist, degenerative for this fragile balance, understanding sustainable development goals as a bridge, not as a final goal, but as a bridge and a driver towards regeneration. And that is where bio inputs can play an essential role in accelerating this transition towards less carbon dependent production systems, to detoxify agriculture, to decarbonize it, and in order to produce food that at the same time will help us with production systems to restore and regenerate this bio capability and this fragile balance that is so essential to have a healthy biosphere that is viable and safe for humanity and for all forms of life. So it's imperative to have a faster transition towards regenerative production systems that may have common goals with the current production systems in terms of productivity, viability, profitability, food security, but with premises and with approaches that are radically different, understanding ecosystems as essential elements for the health of the soil, of water, for biodiversity, restructuring supply chains, strengthening the short commercialization process, maximizing nutrition and public health, not calories, establishing more resilient agricultural systems instead of those that externalize environmental impacts. So along that line, global bioprotection BPG is a global federation of companies dedicated to the development of bio inputs. And here, let me make a clarification. Those manufactured at the farms are also bio inputs, but there's a big difference from the perspective of technology, of safety, efficiency, the competitiveness, scalability, the type of technologies I refer, compared to the most traditional and conventional techniques that are used in small farmers in subsistence agriculture. So BPG is intended to expand and accelerate the adoption of bioprotection solutions, in particular, to protect crops, people, homes, and life. Our federation, Bioprotection Global, is made up of associations from different countries. There are mainly 3 associations in Latin America, precisely because Latin America has also been a reference in the international development of bio inputs of a very high quality. Colombia, in particular, has a tradition of around 50 years in R&D of bio inputs for agriculture. I mean, technically developed and formulated here. Argentina as well, they have the Argentine Chamber of Bioinputs. Brazil they have CropLife Brazil that also has a strong approach on agricultural bioinputs, and in Colombia with ASOBiocol. We contribute significantly to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals as our driver, and these are some of the benefits of using bio inputs more intensely now under this not only global crisis, but with all the disruptions caused by Russia's invasion to Ukraine. These are effective solutions. There's a paradigm here. To a large extent, smuggling, illegal products, informal products made in a garage or without any quality control, that has generated a wrong reputation as to the advances of technology, science, investments, and innovation that these serious companies are using. These technologies can not only protect, but also recover biodiversity as an essential element to maintain the balance of the agricultural ecosystems and also to naturally counteract the pressure of pests and diseases, to assist in the establishment of more resilient systems, the protection of water and soil, the regeneration of ecosystems. It can even turn productive systems into carbon sinks to improve the microbiological quality of the soils. These technologies are less fossil fuel dependent in the manufacturing and also in the logistics because it's possible to manufacture them locally, technically, without any need to transocean transport as we require right now to import the synthetic inputs that we are currently dependent on to a large extent. And they have lower toxicity, they are safer, and they also have fewer problems as to the use of pesticides in the crops and also in terms of the pest resistance. And now to summarize, Latin America has a huge potential thanks to its mega diversity to develop these technologies. It's a region of the world, together with sub-Saharan Africa, that has a huge potential to become the world's food pantry, but it's also one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change. The Green Pact of the European Union, the Farm to Fork strategy, the biodiversity strategy are demanding urgent changes, not only for Europe, but also for Latin America to transform. And agro-exporters use more and more bio-inputs to adapt to these demands. And then, based on the successes that these farmers are seeing, the idea is that these will also move to the food that is consumed locally in our countries. Some bottlenecks that are essential to accelerate these adoptions. Well, there's an urgent need for harmonized and proportionate regulatory frameworks. Unfortunately, very few countries in Latin America have specific regulatory frameworks that facilitate these solutions, and farmers have fewer solutions available because of the restrictions to some chemical synthesis molecules. We require public policies that acknowledge the positive externalities and promote the use of their bio inputs. We require deep changes in education systems, in technical assistance to make a paradigm shift among farmers and agronomists. We need more funding to stimulate R&D in this kind of solutions and more awareness generally among policymakers, regulators, farmers, food companies, consumers in general about the contribution that agricultural bio-inputs may have to this difficult and interactive transformation. Sorry if I took too much of the time assigned. Thank you. Thank you, Nicolas, for this important and clear vision that you have shared. So, to complete the panel, today we also have Jose Roberto Vega Baudrit. He has a PhD in nanotechnology, Department of Inorganic Chemistry at the University of Alicante, Spain. He's specialized in biodegradable polymers, awarded by the National Institute of Materials and Chemical Research from Tsukuba, Japan. And he also has a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering in Polymers from the University of Guadalajara, Mexico. Since 2016, he has been the director of the National Laboratory of Nanotechnology at the National High Technology Center of Costa Rica, founding member and member of the board of directors of CR Biomed, and coordinator of the pharmaceutical and medical device area of ILC Mesoamericas. He's the founder of the UCCR and representative for Costa Rica of the IUCR of crystallography and IUPAC, a representative for Costa Rica in the networks of Nano Andes, Nano DIF, Nanocelia, BioRecer, and Bavio DICC, among others. He has participated in over 200 research projects and also in over 250 articles in indexed scientific journals. He has also created 4 high-tech companies between 2012 and 2018. He was awarded with the Champion of Innovation by the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Technology and Telecommunications through Lanotech and Poliuna. He has created 5 national and international patents. Mr. Vega, the floor is yours. Thank you, Harold. Yes, we can hear you all right. Thank you. Well, first of all, greetings from San Jose, Costa Rica. As Harold said, I'm Jose Roberto Vega Baudrit, and I'm the director of the National Nanotechnology Laboratory here in Costa Rica. At Lanotech, well, we create and develop projects in life sciences. That includes biorefinery projects. We also promote scientific vocations, create regulation processes, and we support innovation processes. This is the concept of biorefinery that is part of the circular economy of bioeconomy. A biorefinery is similar to the oil refining process. The purposes are the same, that is obtaining fuel, energy in the form of fuels, and generate chemical products that are similar to those obtained from oil. Basically, the raw material in biorefinery comes from 3 sources. First generation are the crops like sugarcane and corn. Then second generation, that are subproducts, agro-industrial and marine products, that is biomass, that is used to develop biorefinery. And the third generation, that is algae and yeast, among others. This is the pathway of conversion of biomass. You have mentioned them already, biotechnological or biological, as alcoholic fermentation or physical chemical like drying and milling, and then thermal and chemical like pyrolysis and gasification that allows us to obtain materials and energy from biomass. This is a typical example of the circular economy and biorefinery. You see the sugar cane mill, the sugar is extracted with different qualities, and that is used to obtain the raw material for biorefinery from sugarcane that is called the bagazo. It can be separated to produce energy for the plant and also for the biorefinery processes that include in the solid fraction the generation of energy. And then the liquid part is used for chemical products like cellulose, syrup, xylitol, furfural, etc. Of course, to close the cycle of biorefinery, it's important to have a balance of mass and energy, also an economic balance, and compare alternatives in order to find the best ways of using this biomass. So basically, all this biomass has 3 important raw materials. That is, well, of course, the solid part, that is, we can extract the cellulose, lignin, and juice that is rich in sugar, that through several processes like fermentation, we can have chemical products with value added. This is an example on the left, lignin, through chemical processes like acid or base or redox or thermal or biological processes, we can obtain several products with a high commercial value for medical device companies, for example, or pharmaceutical companies, the health sector in general. And on the right, you can see in the case of the juices, they are treated with bacteria like Leuconostoc mesenteroides that allows us to treat saccharose to break the molecule and obtain a product like dextrane that has a high commercial value and important applications in the pharmaceutical industry. The third is cellulose, and more recently the obtention of nanocellulose through nanotechnological processes that allow us to obtain high added value products with electronic applications. Here you can see the molecule of cellulose, and the market, the potential market for nanocellulose currently is $8.2 billion with an annual growth of 4.2%, which makes this projection of nanocellulose quite attractive. Costa Rica has not lagged behind. Costa Rica has an economy that is strongly based on the production of agricultural products. We produce 6.3 billion tons of organic residues only in the primary economic sector. And this implies an issue, not only environmentally, but also economically, because it's essential to transform this waste, basically for the treatment of the waste. For example, we have the part of the plant that is only generated by two pines in their cycle of life, and it's important to eliminate this stubble in the second production. Now there are 43,000 hectares of crops, and that generates 4.3 times 10 a la 6 tons. That means 640,000 tons per year of waste, dry waste. So based on these examples, not only for pineapple, but for other farming products, in 2020, in Costa Rica, we launched the National Strategy of Bioeconomy, known as Costa Rica 2020-2030, that had 5 strategic axes. One is number 3, for instance, that includes the biorefinery of residual biomass, intended to develop new production activities based on the full use and the revaluation of the biomass in the agricultural, fishing, and forestry activities. As we've seen in the previous presentations, the development of bioeconomy in Costa Rica has been slow. Fortunately, with the change of administration, this strategy is led by the Ministry of Science and Technology, Innovation and Telecommunications, and the person that led it in the previous administration continues in the current administration. So we are hopeful that he will strongly promote this in the next 4 years.
The knowledge of the residual biomass, the production of bioenergy, as well as the production of biomolecules and high-value advanced products. This is one example of the biorefinery example obtained from the pineapple peel, which is another product generated in the management of the pineapple fruit. In blue, to your right, you can see the series of products obtained from research carried out in labs of the universities and even in research centers, such as the different type of cellulose, L-dopamine, cellulose, and xylitol, the polylactic acid, which has a biodegradable compost. Used as a palliative to pollution for some plastics, fructose, oils, and energy. And to conclude, this is the diagram of a study carried out in nanotech to find the profitability of the production of nanocellulose from pineapple peels. The PMR said, gave an interesting result. We found that the production of nanocellulose from these byproducts of the pineapple industry were economically profitable. And this is a competitive advantage for countries that are not producers. So this is it. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Vega, for your important presentation, and to the panelists for your views, analysis, and contributions carried out. So unfortunately, time is over. So our apologies. So right now I'm saying goodbye. Has been a real honor to be with you this day. And for the official closing ceremony, we ask Mr. Hugo Chavarria to give us the final remarks. Thanks to the panelists. Excellent. Uh, we have had almost everybody in previous events, but it is impressive. We never stop learning. We have people from different countries, people from United States, from Greece, from Latin America. So those people are really impacted with the discussion. So thank you so much for this, and thank you for putting Latin America in this discussion. As you know, uh, yeah, ICABR is probably the most important conference, so that these topics are present in the region, and the region is playing a leading role is vital. Just 5 messages I would like to rescue from your words. Daring a little bit and trying to retake some of the things you put on the table. The first thing is that the war took us in a wrong position. The war arrives at a time where not only we're experiencing the consequences of COVID, but also the environmental and social and economic problems for the past 3 years. I don't know, I don't remember who said that, but this is the first message. The war comes to generate distortions in food, energy markets, particularly fertilizers and fuels, as well as in other byproducts. Something Agustin mentioned that I really like, he said there are distortions in 3 levels: international trade, international agenda, and commercial debt. And that makes the relative prices to change, and this change in the relative prices and the new context, and this is the third message made by Eduardo and retake by Roberto, is that this change in the relative prices and the new context generate a scenario of acceleration towards transition of bioeconomy. From since 15 years ago, the bioeconomy aspect was positioning and promoted by European projects, projects of international organizations and the country themselves. And this scenario seems to be the perfect time where we can accelerate, and we have all the justifications about why and what could be the gains we may have. Opportunities in biofuels are open, particularly biogas and aviation fuels. Opportunities in biotechnology are open from the technological reforms and the progress in this technology convergence. So the limits, the boundaries between science, technology, knowledge are removed, and that makes that empowers the development and uses. Bioinsume opportunities are open. The price increase and high dependency from international markets will allow us to change this formula between the chemical aspect and the biological aspect, and the opportunities for biorefinery are open. So we need to promote that. So today we have the basic conditions, we have the power, we have a scenario that favors us. We need to enhance this. We need to work hard in raising awareness, capacity building, research, development, innovation aspects, and market development. So we have the potentialities. So and our work. By our work, I mean public and private. Daring Alada, want to put this on the table. Thank you very much to everybody for being with us. Thanks everybody for promoting this discussion. We're sure this is going to be really fruitful. Thank you so much.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Saludos a todos.
Thank you.
Gracias. Hasta luego.
Thank you. Bye.